complaint I see daily on my channel across all of my videos is that there's just too many pump-action magazine-fed springers. Even I'm guilty of this at times, and honestly I'm trying to turn that around, because one thing I've also always said is that there is no one-size-fits-all for everyone. Just like with virtually every single other kind of shooting sport out there, there are so many different options even in the same category, because not one thing is going to work for everybody. And one of the best ways to demonstrate that is with two blasters from two completely different creators that both share a lot of similarities, yet are completely different in a lot of ways. Heck, they even share main hardware at times. And doing a video on one or the other, I would be repeating myself constantly, so I'm gonna throw them both into one video. And seriously, I want to see your comments down below on which one you prefer and why, because I think that'll just help everybody out here. These are two very good blasters that are completely different and yet very similar. Both of these blasters today were sent to me months ago by 3D Blasted Hawaii LLC, and I owe Ross a huge apology because it's taken me far too long to get this video out. And Ross doesn't deserve that, because 3D Blasted Hawaii is one of the best shops in the hobby. They are the only shop I have seen that actually documents the entire process of building the blaster, checking everything off, and chronographing it before it gets put in the box and sent to you. That level of customer service I have never seen elsewhere in this hobby. And while both these blasters are minimal hardware builds, in fact, a lot of the hardware can be found on Amazon, surprisingly enough, and are designed to be relatively easy to 3D print, that means that 3D Blasted Hawaii sells them at a very reasonable price for a handmade, shipped to you, fully customized and built blaster. So you can build it yourself, or you can have Ross save you the trouble. I'll have links to everything down in the description below. But if you're now looking to jump into the ecosystem, get yourself your first 3D printed primary blaster, 3D Blasted Hawaii LLC is the way to do it. And to just start everything off, this is the Tulip by Poppy, and this is the RUSH by Shoelesshistorian. They're both Springer pump-action magazine-fed primary blasters, and they both use the same plunger tube from the SLAB. And we're gonna start with the Tulip. Starting at $120 fully built without a stock from 3D Blasted Hawaii LLC, the Tulip is a compact primary blaster. It has the option to go stockless, have a 3D printed stock, or use the worker stock from yesteryear. It's a standard 16mm outer diameter barrel, so it works with pretty much every single SCAR out there, and this one was included in the box for me. The entire thing is 3D printed, so it uses 3D printed grooves in a spiral, so as the dart leaves the barrel, the foam catches those grooves, gives it a spin, and stabilizes it in flight, increasing your accuracy. Behind that, we've got the pump action. Now, this is a Picatinny rail, so you can put whatever the heck you want on it. It did include this angled foregrip, which I happen to like a lot. It's like the same one that I believe is on my Talon claw, and it works really well. And while it looks like it just has 3D printed connector rails that connect to the pusher, it actually has a linear rail at the top that is buttery smooth. I need to come up with a different analogy because I'm going to be saying that a lot. But yeah, this thing is about as smooth as you can get. Which, of course, if you're pumping this thing over and over a long period of time, that is going to make it far easier on you, and thus just make it a better experience all around. Up on top of that, we've got a Picatinny rail for whatever optics you want. And then we've got the magwell, which honestly might be one of the best things about this blaster, because it is a push-button mag release, not something I see all that often, ambidextrous at that, and it, oh my god, it works perfectly. It does use a skinny pusher. That means you can load magazines and unload magazines without priming the blaster. And behind that, we've got a main grip, which is a hinged trigger, which I like a lot more than the straight pullback triggers. And this feels really good. Ergonomically, this is fantastic. And of course, you can actually see the entire action of your blaster. So when you prime it back, you can see all the stuff that matters. Then of course we got a multi-position stock setup with a lever right here to unlock it, so you can adjust it into different positions, or you can push it all the way forward like so, and if you were to take off the SCAR here, it'd be a really compact, packable blaster. But the Tulip has a party trick that I don't see anywhere else with this, as I've dubbed it, the flower power dial. This actually allows you to adjust the pre-compression on your spring, giving you the ability to add or remove velocity without swapping out the entire spring. Although if you back it all the way out, you could of course just pull out the whole spring, and that will also let you to service a couple of things in here, like relubing your plunger tube and whatnot. But this pink part right here actually locks it in place so it doesn't move. But if you unlock that, you can adjust this one, and that does allow you to add like 50, 60 feet per second of velocity to your shots. And there's quite a bit of travel here, so you can really dial that in if you're taking this to a very specific velocity cap. And even with the blaster fully maxed out, the prime is still really easy. Moving on, we have the RUSH, which is a very similar looking thing, and yet Just about everything about it is different with the exception of the plunger tube. Standard 60mm outer diameter barrel, this one does include a 3D printed B-car that Ross said is one of his favorites, and I really like how this one works because it's very easy to add and remove from blasters with this little locking nut right there. While I could see it in pictures on 3D Blaster Hawaii LLC's Etsy, I could not find it for sale. But if you ask for it, I'm sure they can add it to your order. On the Rush, we've got a 3D printed vertical foregrip, which is really good if you have a lot of spring compression that you need to work over. That does give you a way better leverage, but it is thicker at the bottom and thinner towards the top, and I find it actually really good, which for a vertical foregrip, I'm very surprised by. Here's where things just get wacky though, because if you could probably notice from this, that is the only connection point for the entire priming system, which absolutely blows my mind how tech has evolved in this hobby over the last couple of years, because it is a very reasonable, smooth prime for having a single bar. Again, low hardware, very simple, light 3D printed design. We do have a Picatinny rail that runs the entire upper length of the blaster, and the magwell on the Rush is actually meant for angled Talon mags as opposed to standard Talon mags. Now, I'm quite aware that there's a remix of the Rush called the Crush that swaps that over. However, if you have a couple of these, which I do, and you happen to like the way the angled magwell works on a rifle-like design, which I am a huge fan of, that is absolutely the way to go, and you're probably gonna stand out because not a lot of people actually use angled Talons. The mag release is only located on the left-hand side, so if you are a lefty, you got a push button, no problem. If you're a righty, not a big deal. Reach up, grab your mag, it works fine. And it does freely drop mags. The trigger is another hinged trigger design. This one has very little travel, and it is very crisp. And that does help with your accuracy a lot. The grip back here, again, it is thinner at the top, wider at the base for the meat of your hand. It does have a rest right there for your fingers. You've got the shelf where you can rest your thumb, and it makes it easy for your trigger finger to reach forward. You've also got a big, beefy 3D printed loop right here that you can use for a sling. This is pretty large. You could probably break it, but probably not. And at the very end, we've got a stop with a Picatinny rail on it, which you could attach a stock to. And this stock is so cool because it's a push button folder. Unfortunately, it doesn't lock into place, which I really wish it did, but that is sick. And this thing feels fantastic in the hands. I really like this design. Lengthwise, stock's fully extended and everything like that, even with this very large scar on the end of the Tulip is still a couple of inches shorter. The entire package of the Rush is actually a little bit shorter than the Tulip when it's fully compacted. That being said, if you match up the grips, yeah, the Rush is a little bit longer. But even velocity-wise, both blasters are extremely similar. I have to apologize, I was using some questionably worn darts that got mixed in with my fresh ones, so you can ignore most of the lower numbers. But the Tulip with the included spring at the lowest minimal setting I could get the spring compression to, using Adventure Force Pro darts, it did hover around 130 feet per second velocities, which is humans versus zombies legal. Although a couple of times it did hit a little bit higher than that, you could mitigate that with slightly heavier darts. And at the maximum setting, I was hitting over 170 feet per second velocities, which is pretty impressive for such a smooth priming lightweight blaster. Speaking of which, the accuracy with the Tulip was also more than serviceable. While of course I am subject to adding human error into the testing, I ran the Tulip several times and my results were pretty consistent. And I have no problem saying that with the Tulip, if you're using fresh darts, even with a 3D printed scar, and I can do better than this one, the Tulip is going to hit foam darts where you aim it. Moving over to the Rush, I did find the ergonomics to be a bit more palatable for me, but the end results were extremely similar to what I was getting with the Tulip. That's not very surprising. Both of these use very similar hardware in a lot of places and vastly different designs in others, but the velocity was comfortably over 180 feet per second most of the time. And of course, you could throw a harder spring in here to get a little bit more increased velocity. Accuracy-wise, no complaints. The shots I were missing, I did feel were just up to born darts at that point. When most of the darts go where I aim the blaster, that means misses and stuff are on me or the darts and not exactly on the actual blaster itself. So when it comes to the Rush, you shouldn't feel outgunned on the field. The aim of this video wasn't to pit these two blasters against each other. In fact, it was just to show that while you could use very similar hardware and a similar design philosophy of making an easy to print low hardware primary blaster, you could come up with wildly different designs even within the same platform of a mag-fed pump-action Springer blaster. But what I can confidently say is that both of these blasters bring uniqueness to the table, even if they are the same thing, and what you want to get just kind of depends on A, what you need, and B, what you like. While ergonomics and design and everything are subjective, you would honestly just have to take both these blasters through the screen, give them a run, and figure out which one you prefer yourself. But of course, my own biases are going to come through on what one I prefer. And while I think a lot of the ergonomics on the RUSH are superior for me in a lot of ways, I really liked the Tulip. The Tulip's mag release is so good. The prime is smooth as heck. There's very little hardware on this blaster, and not only can you find spring and barrel combinations to hit the velocity cap you want, you can actually dial it in even more consistently by adjusting the pre-compression. And for me, those are all things I value. But the RUSH has a lot of cool stuff going for it, and I would understand why somebody would prefer this. That stock is just sick. The angled mags, again, you can get one without angled mags. I happen to prefer this, to be honest. Looks amazing, feels good, gives me a use for a mag type that I don't normally have a use for, and it feels amazing in the hand. Even the grip, which was something that I was very contentious about when I got it, over time, I've grown to love it, but it's not as easy to take this thing down and swap out the spring. I'm gonna need a screwdriver and so forth. And I'm gonna be trying a lot of spring and barrel combinations to hit whatever velocity cap I'm taking it to. Which takes this entire video to say again, there are a lot of options out there because there has to be a lot of options out there. Even if both of these hit the same exact velocity, the differences between them, even when they use similar hardware, is going to pull people in one direction or another. And that's why I personally want to change my preconceptions about this. Instead of groaning that there's another option, I should be excited that there's another option, especially from two very talented designers that honestly don't get enough attention. All that to say is I wish we get more options. Velocity is not everything. Yes, it is a very big contributing factor, but after a point, there are heavy diminishing returns, especially when you start getting into the numbers where it's just not legal at most games. And heck, maybe even they inspired you to start building your own. Maybe there is a perfect one-size-fits-all option for everybody and it just hasn't been made yet.